I will tell you, we didn't spend a lot of time putting it together. We were actually having to turn kids away from wanting to present. You know, we had so many
Good.
different options, and they did a fabulous job on a lot of their own time to put this together. So we're very proud of all of them.
We should also recognize Mr. Mike Maloney also as the assistant principal and helping put this together. But that was a great job. I was impressed with everything we saw, the composure of the kids. As I mentioned to Mr. Venezia, the 8th graders seem a lot smarter now than when I was in the 8th grade. So that's, I guess, a little scary. But,
You're comparing them to yourself, though. Right?
well, yeah, right.
Thank
was
you
very
so
good.
much. We appreciate your time.
Great job.
Thank you. How many people tried out for the commentator's job? Were you the only one, or did you have to beat us?
They actually picked me.
They picked you. I know. I can see why.
Yeah.
I can see why. You can go now.
That's great.
Jerry doesn't like to.
No.
So what's so amusing though is that when Cliff's on camera, it looks like he's got the tut.
Oh, he's
Right
got
on top of him,
King
yeah.
Tut right behind him, yeah. That's
It's
me.
fabulous.
But that was impressive.
Look at
It
the
was.
blending on the. It's just
The koi
everything is
picture
so
is
beautiful,
beautiful.
Yeah. Look at everything they've got hanging up there.
and a lot of community action too, which I really like.
Yeah.
Artwork in this school is fantastic. Fantastic.
Awesome.
It is. It
We know
really
how to
is.
clear a room, don't we?
I will say that I think that these visits that we do every year help at least not only to bring us into the schools, but to bring the community into the schools and to see what a lot of parents, a lot of people who don't have children in the system don't have a chance to see what's going on. And I know that this year we've done a lot more reaching out, a lot more communications. We've got our articles in the newspaper and on Patch, and but this really helps to bring that to life for a lot of people that don't have a chance to see it. So
We should expand too. Start taking some trips out of town.
to other school districts,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
probably a good idea to do some comparing,
All right.
compare and
no.
contrast. Wilmington's
no,
next.
No.
I know that from my experience of working with the kids on Science Olympiad, that they are just awesome.
It's very impressive. Very impressive. Great. Now back to the rigors of our regular agenda here.
Mundane.
I'm skipping it.
And the fiscal year 12 budget, which it might have been nice if a few people stayed around to hear. But Kathy, Carl, do you want to bring us up to speed as to where we are and what we're thinking? And then we can have discussion and see what we're going to do in terms of a vote.
Okay, you're gonna just present.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. In your budget packet, there are 2 budget tracking documents, and I'd like to speak briefly to each of these documents. The document that is dated April 11th represents that document that was presented a week ago tonight at the budget hearing. As you may recall, 1 week ago tonight, we had a budget gap of about $309,000. So superintendent presented a plan that would involve a mix of non-personnel cuts and personnel cuts that would reduce that deficit close to zero. So that's where we stood as of last Monday. The second document is dated April 20th, and that represents a change in that we are hoping that there will be additional circuit breaker funds made available to the district. Circuit breaker, of course, are funds that are provided by the state to assist us with high expense special education students. And the former document, April 11th, represents a circuit breaker allotment of 40%. That means that we, as a worst case scenario, assume that we will be reimbursed at 40% of our high expense students. However, the governor and the Senate are hoping to increase that allotment from 40% up to as high as 60 or 70%. The House, excuse me, I said that backwards.
It's the House and the House and the Governor.
Yeah.
The Senate
Yeah.
hasn't weighed in yet.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you for that. So we're still awaiting the Senate's deliberations on this issue. So what we've done here is present to you an April 20th document which provides for a 60% circuit breaker reimbursement. If that is the case, then we would be able to close our budget deliberations, if you will, and match the available funds number by only making non-personnel cuts. We understand that the school committee has made it a strong priority to not make any personnel cuts if at all possible. That's not in any way to reduce the impact of these non-personnel cuts that are shown here. And briefly, as you can see, in this April 20th document, we, I don't know if we want to say we're proposing, but we are summarizing a scenario whereby we would reduce our small capital and textbook lines by $37,000. We would make that same school expense cut across the board amounting to almost $100,000. And we also, in this scenario, would be reducing our district-wide professional development by $30,000. Those three cuts total $165,000, thereby reducing the budget gap to zero. So in summary, this April 20th budget tracking document is by no means the final statement on this matter, because the Senate has yet to act. But should it act, we feel that this would be the administration's recommendation.
And just to bring you up to speed, both the administration and I this week have been in contact with Selectman Chair Bob Messeri, and he's made it pretty clear that there is no more money that's going to be coming our way. This amount of $24,031,464 is what we're going to get from the town, pending getting all of the state aid that the town has been promised, both the school aid and the general aid. You know, in the past, we voted for our modified level services budget, but that was knowing that the selectmen were going to be able to come up with more money. I don't see them coming up with more money unless something falls from the sky. I mean, Mr. Messeri was pretty clear. There's a concern about how much money they're taking out of the debt stabilization fund. They're already taking more out than they wanted to. I think at least a couple $100,000 more, which means that going forward we can borrow less for major projects because we don't have that money in the debt stabilization fund. And that's where the extra money, a lot of the extra money that we're getting already this year is coming from that debt stabilization fund. This issue with the circuit breaker is shaky because we don't have the Senate weighing in yet. Both the House and the Senate have weighed in on Chapter 70 and have weighed in on general local aid, and both have said they plan to keep it at the governor's level, proposed level. So we're a little bit more solid on those two. I believe we won't know until, I think we got a communication from Brad Jones today saying that we may know in the mid-May to late May timeframe as to what the Senate is going to do with the circuit breaker. So that's where we stand in terms of selectmen, in terms of State House. So any comments and questions at this point?
So essentially then, we can balance this budget without, or we can go with a level services budget without any personnel reductions at all, if these numbers hold true.
No, we are, I mean, it's not level services. We're cutting $166,000.
I understand, but I'm talking about
Oh,
personnel.
we won't have to cut any personnel, right?
Yeah, we won't have to reduce any personnel whatsoever. Just, is this realistic? I mean, that's a pretty big number on the school expenses, $98,000.
Well, it'll be very difficult. It will be very difficult. It represents a 15% reduction from the FY12 number against, if you look at the FY12 budget numbers for all the schools, this $98,000 cut would be a 15% cut. However, the FY12 budget had an 8% increase over last year, because we were trying to get back to level services. So this would actually, this $98,000 cut would represent a 7% reduction over the present year. So, to answer your question, Jerry, this reduction was recommended by the administrative council so that personnel would
They're
not
the
be
ones that have to
impacted.
deal with it, so. What's the potential gap with the Senate's circuit breaker number? I mean, how far could that vary from what the
I
House
think,
and the governor?
what did you add, Carl, into the about 145,000 or
Yes,
something?
yes.
Okay.
So if they don't, if the Senate says, well, we want to keep it at 40% or whatever now, then there'll be a fight
This
between the
conference
Senate.
committee and,
There'll be a
yeah.
conference committee and.
Yeah,
and
okay. So that's the number, though. The number would be no more than $140,000.
Should, right.
Okay.
Casual 140,000.
Yes.
Well, Cliff, in the big picture, I mean, I'm looking at this, and it's not exactly level services, but when you can maintain your staffing levels and you can maintain your class size for the most part, I think that's something under the circumstances that we should probably be thankful for.
Cliff?
Yeah, this is the best it's gonna be. This is best it's gonna be. And I can't imagine going for an override for $165,000. I don't think that makes any sense at all. I'm continued to be unhappy with the fact that we're continuing to slide. We've been sliding for 3 years, 4 years, or more. We're not really replacing what happened 4 years ago. But we have kids in school all the days of the week, whole days, and for at least the 180 days that we have to have, instead of the 182 we
Used to
once
have,
had.
right.
I think it's an unhappy situation, but it's an unhappy situation in the world today, so that's what it is.
I had a couple of questions. In cutting the small cap and textbooks by 37,774, what was the original amount we had in there?
86,000.
So that leaves us $48,000 approximately.
No, when we made the original adjustment, remember we made an adjustment of $287,000 initially to cover
Oh,
some of
right,
the
right,
changes
right.
that we need to make. So that we had previously reduced that 86 in the adjustments by 42,775,
So what will we have left in there for small cap and textbooks?
$25,000.
And do we have a target for that money, or
We have many targets for that money.
more than $25,000 worth, I'm assuming?
Exactly. Exactly.
You're just gonna have to prioritize and figure out.
We will need to prioritize.
Because I want to raise one, and maybe you can clear this up and maybe not, but I've gotten a couple of emails this week, and I've talked to people about a concern about the science program, science textbooks, science kits. Where exactly are we with that, and what kind of impact will this have on that?
Well, without getting too deep into the conversation, it's a very good question. The No Atom Science was adopted, it was piloted this year in grade 3. It's very well received by the teachers and the students. It's a very expensive program. And it's very expensive not only to purchase, but also to sustain from one year to the next. We would need about $31,000 just to put it into grade 4 next year. And every year after that, we'd need another $17,000 to replenish the kits and to replenish the consumables that are used by the students. So I have some initial concerns around this program to begin with. We won't have enough money to implement the program in grade 4 for next year. But out of the $25,000, we're going to need $17,000 just to keep grade 3 going for another year. Patrick and I have had some serious conversations about stepping back and looking at the adoption of this and trying to ascertain the sustainability of this from one year to the next moving forward. In an ideal world, we would have the money that we need to sustain this after we purchase it outright for all of the grades. But that would be almost $100,000 annually in grades 1 through 5 if we put this in place in all 5 grades. So It's a very complex situation. It's very well received by the teachers, but it's very, very expensive. We're also taking a look